that means that some of the most important growth we can have in our life is going to be an occasion of dissonance, of cognitive dissonance within us. So cognitive dissonance can be a harbinger of growth. It can be a sign that there's something here that is real and deep and that we're resisting it.
Before we get started, if you enjoy these episodes, you might want to explore more at optimalwork.com. Our website offers unique content, tools, and exercises to help you thrive at work and beyond. We have an in-depth masterclass which covers our entire theory of growth. We have daily recommendations for personalized advice, and we have a platform to help groups and organizations learn and practice optimal work together. You can get a free trial at optimalwork.com. Now let's get started with today's episode. Hey, this is Sharif, joined by Dr. Kevin Majors. Kevin, good to be back here with you again.
Hey, Sharif, great to be back.
Yeah, Kevin. So last week we had a great discussion of venting and venting negative emotions and why that's not a great solution or a way to deal with them because they tend to come back. But another effect of venting that we kind of touched on was that it will tend to make you see things, see the situation that you're complaining about or venting about in a new light, and maybe lead to a kind of self-justification to think that you must have been on the right side of things. So I thought we could dive into that self-justification today here a little more.
Yeah, that's great, Sharif. And some of the people who are real experts on venting and the problems with it also are experts on this phenomenon of self-justification. So I'm thinking particularly of Carol Tavris and Elliot Aronson, who have this wonderful book called Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me. This idea that somehow people have a hard time admitting when they make mistakes. But in fact, I think we'll see that the concept of self-justification is even deeper than just how we don't admit mistakes. So the idea of why we justify ourselves goes back to a theory that's called cognitive dissonance. So maybe I should just dive in. How does that sound to go into that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Cognitive dissonance. That's something that you hear the phrase, with some frequency just thrown around, but I guess, yeah. So it's interesting that it has it's a real psychological term in the literature that with a good definition, I assume.
Exactly. Yeah. So the story of cognitive dissonance is in a way how Skinner was overthrown in psychology, because in the 1950s, everything was behaviorist. And in the original conception of Skinner, meaning not more recent, I think, healthy advances that I always talk about, but in the original psychology, thoughts were seen as nothing. And reinforcement was everything. So it wasn't easy to see how people, how do you have any freedom and what's really human? But it was Leon Festinger was the researcher in social psychology who brought back the importance of thoughts. And it was a really brilliant experiment. They had someone doing some kind of mundane industrial organization task, something very boring. And then it's supposed to be part of this experiment to see, how well or quickly he could do something. And at the end, the experimenter would thank him and then explain, my assistant had to go away. So could you help me with the next experiment? And then they revealed that, in fact, there's different conditions here. And for the person coming in, they need to hear before they start this experiment that it was, in fact, kind of fun and exciting. So would you be willing to go and tell them, hey, welcome, pretend you're the assistant, and you're going to love this experiment. It's fun and exciting. And then the person, if they agreed to do it, was going to be paid either $1 or $20, which back in 1959 was a lot of money. And well, so they did this. It's this elaborate drama, which is typical of this kind of research. They set up these dramas. Because essentially they're trying to get someone to lie for either $1 or $20. And then at the end, after they did it, they asked them some questions about what they thought about the original task that they did. Okay, to see, did the people that lie kind of change their, because I think they asked them once immediately after, and then once later, did they change their view of that original task to match their lie? And if so, Skinner would have predicted that the people who received $20 would be much more likely, because they were more reinforced, to see the original task positively. But those paid $1 would be much less likely because they didn't get reinforced. And in fact, it was the complete opposite. So the people who were paid only $1 and yet lied about it and said that this was in fact a fun and exciting, task, ended up having a much more positive view of the task. They changed their beliefs to match their behavior. And so this is what they call in psychology then, one, cognitive dissonance. The fact that they were not sufficiently motivated by the money reward and yet did this thing ended up creating enough dissonance in them that they needed then a mechanism to reduce the dissonance. And that mechanism was a kind of self-justification. In this case, by flipping their view of the task,
but just to
make
be
it much
clear,
more positive.
the task meaning that boring industrial organization task, they would actually say that was really fun, and that's why I told those people it was fun, because I actually believe that it was fun.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So that they had to protect their self-image as being basically good people, and they did that by inflating the goodness of the task, how fun it was, so that in the end it wasn't really much of a fib.
Okay. So whereas the other people just said, I lied for $20.
Yeah, exactly. And the task wasn't really great at all. So there was no motive for them to really come up with an alternate explanation. They're like, I just did it for the money.
Before we continue, a brief message. If you're benefiting from these discussions, please hit like and subscribe to our channel. Doing so helps us reach more people. So you're not just learning yourself, you're helping others discover a path to growth and flourishing too. Thanks so much for your support. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
So that people end up kind of believing, in a sense, their own lies is the effect of self-justification. That we end up telling these stories that exonerate us, and then we believe those stories. And this process doesn't have to involve lying, because so many things in life can be viewed in different ways. There's lots of different viewpoints. The idea here is that we should be kind of curious about how we defend our past actions. Like, are we really defending our own self-concept? Because I think that's the deeper thing. And this was Elliot Aronson's discovery. He was a student of Festinger, and then he and Festinger ended up disagreeing about cognitive dissonance. And Aronson had this idea that what makes, if you can't just have cognitive dissonance about things that don't relate to you personally, that cognitive dissonance only comes about when it's the self-concept of the person that's at stake. When you're having to, so when the self-concept is somehow challenged by your own behavior, then you try to justify yourself. And so, so that's the idea. And there are examples galore of this, in the fact that there's the book, as I mentioned, Mistakes Were Made. It's basically a catalog of all these examples in different fields, where people, it could be like prosecutors who end up getting evidence that totally exculpates the person, and they suppress the evidence or they deny it, or even after the person is cleared of all charges, they still totally believe that this person's guilty. And that's a very common phenomenon. So, but it also happens in medicine and in therapy. One of the interesting examples in the book is of this person, I think they call her Grace, who had a panic attack and then went to a therapist. And the therapist ended up convincing this, Grace, that the reason she had the panic attacks is that because she had been abused horribly by her father when she was young and it suppressed the memory. This is during this rage of suppressed memories and suppressed trauma. And so Grace ended up, cutting off relations with her family, even her husband and son, but then just doubted it because every memory she had of her father was that he was loving and kind. So she just couldn't, it didn't fit. So she went to the therapist and I've cut everything off. I don't feel better. And this just doesn't fit my memory of him. And the therapist told her, "You're sicker now than you ever were," which is like this incredibly invalidating, of course, but it's that rather than change the theory, the therapist doubled down on it. And so all of us, though, have a tendency to double down on our positions, even when there's evidence to the contrary, and we just kind of disregard that evidence.
Yeah. So just to be clear, I guess you mentioned this distinction between Aronson and Festinger, that Aronson thinks it has to be referred to the self. But in these cases, it doesn't seem like that's exactly what's happening. I mean, with a therapist, it's their belief, I guess it's their own beliefs about the other person's situation. Or I think you see this in, I don't know, maybe political positions or something where evidence to the contrary gets ignored. So it's kind of like a confirmation bias, I guess.
Yeah.
But
see, the more confident the therapist is that they see things the proper way, the right way, that they are the expert, the more likely they are then to disregard any evidence that goes against that. So it's the self-concept the therapist has that basically I am very good at detecting hidden trauma and uncovering it, and I can spot all the symptoms. And it can be hard to admit when it's not the case. And truth be told, it can go the opposite way too. You could have people, in fact, with bad trauma that were having panic attacks, and you could treat the panic attacks as if they were just a kind of hypersensitivity to carbon dioxide levels going down or something totally biological, and then miss the actual richer context that this was happening in. So there's no one right way to view panic attacks or traumatic memories. It's just the idea is that there could, how open are we? This is like an expert bias. The experts are really prone to this. Then how open is the expert to an alternate explanation? And so I do think that there's a sense that they are defending their own sense of expertise.
Mm-hmm. So the way you've portrayed it, at least in this case, is just kind of like a pride or something. I'm right. I'm the expert. And then you're going to disregard alternate viewpoints. Is there a concept, or the notion of a self-concept, is it always rooted around this kind of expert self-justification pride, or is there also other forms that it takes in different situations or people?
I would say that, and this would be like perhaps a daring statement, given that would have to be looked at more closely. But my instinct here is that the self-concepts essentially are what were traditionally called pride. That pride is nothing more than a self-image that defends itself. So this kind of concept of who you are. And humility is in some ways the experience of self without the filter of any self-concept. So humility is a kind of mindfulness of self simply as we are, without needing to defend anything, without reaction to the conceptualized self. So in ACT, this is called the difference, which is one of the huge parts of acceptance and commitment therapy, is the difference between the life lived from the conceptual self or the conceptualized self, and then life lived in which the self is experienced as the context in which other things arise. So you can never identify the self with behaviors or with thoughts or with emotions, because it's the context in which all of those come from. But really it means that there is a sense in which the more we just experience these things, that, okay, there are behaviors that we've done in the past. We don't have to justify them. We don't have to defend them. If there's mistakes in them, we can completely admit that those were mistakes. That's the freedom you have if you don't have to defend a conceptualized self as like the expert, or as the one who's always right about politics, or like the one who knows everything about how to pronounce French words, or whatever the little expertise it is that we might cling to. And so the self-concepts are the self-image that actually is the source of the problem.
Mm-hmm. What if this self-concept is negative, like I'm shy and that's why I did this, or I'm bad at math and that's why I didn't do well on the math test? Then, I mean, how could that be a source of pride?
Yeah, so it's interesting to think that you see this in its most extreme form in fragile narcissists, which do have these vulnerable beliefs, like the sense of the self is damaged, yet highly defending themselves. I mean, could you imagine a shy person who is very arrogant versus a shy person who is very humble? So, like, how would they approach social situations differently? And we can see there that, like, the shy persons, if they have a very strong, fixed concept of themselves, as this shy, but I'm sure there must be some of the good qualities that they see in themselves, like a shy but actually smart or whatever person. In fact, they will defend changing that self-concept, or it's almost like the self-concept defends itself against change with self-justification. So they make excuses for themselves why they can't change. That this is they might blame other people to explain why they can't change. That, my parents, didn't let me take part in these sporting events when I was young, and I never really learned to socialize, and now it's too late, I can't change. But there'd be some form of self-justification, even for the negative beliefs they have about themselves. And this is kind of what makes, what I think Elliot Aronson's contribution so interesting, is that any attempt people have to grow could be met by a self-concept that defends itself from change. So they just don't see themselves as capable of changing. And the more they believe that, the more they will discount any evidence to the contrary.
So then how do we overcome this? I mean, if this seems like a big obstacle to our growth, well, I guess first of all, how do we identify that this is what's happening? I mean, if we're trying to grow in a particular area, or maybe it even comes from external, like someone points out that, hey, this wasn't great, and so that gives us an opportunity. We see an opportunity to grow potentially. But if this is going to be operative, how do we identify it, and how do we start to reverse it?
Yeah, so I think the clearest signal, I think, that we have a self-concept that's resisting change is that there are certain forms of growth that are off limits for us. So we just don't think we can do it. In optimal work, we get this all the time when we are encouraging people to jump out of bed the moment their alarm first sounds. And people just think, I'm not a morning person. I can't do this. It's like, this is just outside what... It's good to see that all of that is a self-concept resisting change. So certain forms of growth are put off limits. So we should be highly tuned into ourselves when we notice we have a self-concept here resisting change. So what would that, if in fact, let's say that a person, you pointed out to them that, hey, all summer long when you had that summer job, if they're a student, you were able to wake up, at 5 a.m. and get to the country club where you were doing the, where you were working as a caddy, for instance. And they're like, well, yeah, but that's because I would get fired if I didn't get out of bed. It's like, well, you did it for 2.5 months, you actually did it. So you can see there that there's a self-concept resisting change, discounting things to the contrary. Another sign of self-justification is that we see that we're blaming others. So any form of if we blame others for the way we are, that's self-justification at work. So that means then that there's something resisting, there's some cognitive dissonance, going on. And, we're being asked to do something that goes outside what we think of ourselves as capable of doing. And then we try to make excuses for it. So if we can detect that we're blaming others.
Yeah. Well, is it always is cognitive dissonance a subconscious process? I mean, for instance, I sometimes find like if I have an argument with someone about politics, which honestly I don't know a whole lot about, and then we disagree, and then I'll find afterwards I'm kind of arguing with their position in my own head. That's, to me, now just reflecting on it, that's probably a sign that I'm like wrong about something. Is that a good way to approach it?
Yeah, so it could be that there's this underlying fear that I'm wrong about something important. And so that creates a dissonance, which is like, I'm a competent person who knows what's important and knows, what's right and wrong. And so that dissonance can lead to people kind of, going through a process trying to resolve the dissonance. And self-justification is the easy way to resolve dissonance. The other way is to admit we're wrong, to like be open to new facts, to get more opinions from more people, to study the issue more. So you can kind of turn that growth into a project. So, and like, okay, I'm going to commit myself to learning more about this. So that would be actually a very good way. So you can ask yourself like, well, one, if dissonance is what's caused by a self-concept resisting change, that means that some of the most important growth we can have in our life is going to be an occasion of dissonance, of cognitive dissonance within us. So cognitive dissonance can be a harbinger of growth. It can be a sign that there's something here that is real and deep and that we're resisting it. So it's like if someone ever gives you some kind of pointer or correction or feedback, and if it was on something we thought we were really good at, then it kind of, we'll notice that in the moment we might take it well and say, oh, great, thank you so much, and I'll think about it, but then later there's like, but this or but that or but that. There's like a fighting part of us, that's actually the self-concept resisting change. So, and it will do it by coming up with justifications. It might blame the person, like they're too picky, they're too, I don't know, whatever. You come up with some way of writing off the giver of the advice. Or somehow we just think that we were misunderstood, or that like somehow our intentions weren't seen. Rather than just trying to like see, okay, how do I make this the occasion of real growth? So we always have to so maybe we can think about it, like what do we need to do if we detect dissonance? I think the first thing is to rejoice in it, because it is so often hidden. We just don't know it's there. And so we don't get a chance to detect that we have this kind of secret self-concept or pride that is being challenged by this. And so we need that dissonance, that feeling of discomfort, to highlight that, hey, here's an important area. So that's the first thing, is just being aware of it so that you can, great, rejoice in it. Rejoice that you're finding it. I think also then we have to move from the conceptualized self, like this image we have of ourselves, let go completely of the image and just be ourselves as we are in our physical body. When we're aware mindfully of our body, in a way that I think is the opposite of being caught up in the self-image. Because the self-image is like a model we have of ourselves. It's not the real self. It's just a model, and we can let go of it. In IFS, they call it the self-like part. So it's this part that tries to act like the self, and it's most afraid of shame, and it's humiliated easily. So we should just be aware then, of like, okay, this thing, this part of me has been activated, and there's something here that is kind of, that maybe is triggering this sense of shame or humiliation. Well, then we can open up compassionately and feel that and embrace it. That it's not too often we get the chance to embrace that feeling of being humbled by something. There's a little bit of shame in admitting we were wrong, and we have a ways to grow in an important area, and to completely admit that. So I think you have the sense of compassion with self, and that's what, when we can be compassionate with this part of us, let her feel the discomfort of being wrong, of admitting there's room for growth. then we don't let ourselves off too easily. We actually can, deal with the issue well. And we also don't blame others.
Yeah, because I was thinking with self-compassion, the way I like to think about it is like ruthless sincerity. Those seem like opposites.
I think actually they're allies.
Okay. Okay, good.
So I think that ruthless sincerity has to do with picking up on self-justification. So you can tell when you're internally defending yourself. And really that means you're defending your self-image. So the true self, the real you, doesn't need to be defended from reality. It's in reality. So you can just let go of the need to defend the self-image and open up just to feel the discomfort that you're experiencing from picking up on this dissonance. And then you can see that once you get past the initial discomfort of admitting you're wrong, there can open up a sense of joy and possibility that, in fact, this is something I could really improve. This might have been a blind spot of mine that I just hadn't noticed for a while. So I need to turn this growth into a project. Make a strategy for it. How could I learn more about it? Could I ask other people if they've noticed the same thing in me? So we always want to get as much growth as we can, from whatever the discomfort is that we're experiencing. So be aware of it, be mindful and in your body, be compassionate with the discomfort, but then also be practical. Turn it into a real progress, a real way of growing.
Right, because it's not enough to just accept, okay, I need to change, I need to be different, but you actually have to now make concrete action.
Exactly. Otherwise, it could just be an easy forgiving of self, like, oh, okay, I'm going to be compassionate and then let it go. No, it's actually like if there are real amends to be made, then you're going to experience even more joy and freedom when you make those amends. It's worth it. And then the other people in your life will benefit too from this. So it should be then that we are quick to admit mistakes. We're quick when it's appropriate to apologize. And and then others see that we're vulnerable. We're grateful at trying to learn. Sometimes, Sharif, that when we got feedback on the masterclass, some feedback was good and helpful, and some really wasn't that good or helpful, to be honest. And so, where people are kind of brutal. And so for me, it was very helpful to have you to talk that over with. It's like, hey, do you think that this is a real issue? And then you could tell me quickly, no, I think that who knows what's going on there. But so it's nice that you can have people you trust, that when you get feedback that is maybe strange, it's like, this isn't the kind of feedback I normally get. Like, I kind of know the feedback I normally get. And so, but sometimes it's just out of left field. It's like, okay, I have no idea if what to make of this.
And that's where a real friend
trust the people around you.
Right. A real friend is going to help you see where you can improve, as opposed to reinforcing your own self-justification, which is just kind of a flatterer.
Exactly. No, I think that's exactly right. I think that, we all need, ways regularly of talking about our growth with others, and to have friends or mentors that we can talk about these things with. And I've been fortunate in my life to always have that. And so it just is easier to overcome the siren song of self-justification if we have people we trust that we can talk to, so that we can bounce then things off them and say, hey, how does this sound? Or I think this is where I need to grow. And the person might be thinking, not really, maybe you have to focus on this other area. But that kind of feedback is extremely helpful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, Kevin, I have one last question for you. So I guess a lot of times we have in the course of this podcast, there's something, kind of an internal process that seems like bad, say getting distracted or, feeling anxious or something. And these are things that we normally just see as bad. I wish I didn't feel like that. But then one of, I think, your constant points is that we can always reframe those internal struggles and see that actually this whole process is not bad. So the whole self-concept and self-justification, this seems like something internally that we do that's just always bad. Like we should just never do it. But obviously, I mean, our brains are kind of doing it. Is there some way in which there's kind of a silver, or we can see it as a good process for us to actually take advantage of in some way? Or is it always just a thing that we have to overcome?
So I think that it is natural to the brain to form a model of the self. So we have a constant need to be shedding our self-concepts. So these models of self, because every model resists change. And every model limits our ability to act contrary to it and to see evidence that goes against it. So, but the models can get, I mean, in a way so being able to detect when our self-concepts are being threatened by growth opportunities, that's the thing that triggers the dissonance. That we could then say, okay, it's impossible for me to grow and excuse our not growing. Or we could respond in a way that's like, okay, here's one of those moments. I can tell I'm justifying myself and then turn that growth into a real project. But I think you can say that the same dynamic does have a flip side when it comes to developing and deepening our bonds with others. So, because if we try to love them as we love ourselves, what that means is we can try to see how we can get better at making excuses for others and seeing them in a better light, the way most people naturally tend to want to see themselves. So this gets into this fascinating idea, which goes back to, I think, Benjamin Franklin, right? This is the one who, you and I have talked about that before, and it's in the book Mistakes Were Made, where he has this example of an enemy of his in was some Congress.
Congress or fellow legislators.
Yeah, and he got that enemy to do him a favor, right? And so to lend him a book. And then he responded to that favor by returning the book a week later with a note thanking him so much for having lent him the book. And from that moment, their relationship completely transformed. This guy who had never said a kind word to him now actually became consistently friendly. So what's kind of at work there? This is a funny way of viewing it. But it's as if the guy, by doing a good deed to Benjamin Franklin, had to come up with a reason why he did it. And the reason was, well, it turns out Benjamin Franklin isn't that bad. So he came up with excuses for Benjamin Franklin, which in a sense reduced the cognitive dissonance of doing a favor for an enemy. He was doing the favor because he was being polite. I mean, it would have been impolite to refuse him to lend this book. But in the end, it helped him to see him in a new way. So there is this virtuous cycle that they point out in the book, Mistakes Were Made, that if you want to see someone in a better light, do something good to them. So treat them well. If you treat them be generous to them, be caring, be thoughtful. Just that act will on its own tend to make it easier and easier for you to see all the good things in the person. So it's a beautiful thing to try. So it'd be a good experiment for us this week.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a wonderful note for us to end on too, Kevin. Thanks so much.
All right, Sharif, great. Thank you.
All right. We'll be back next week. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoyed our conversation and you're looking for more in-depth guidance, check out optimalwork.com, our platform of content, tools, and exercises that will help you thrive at work and beyond. See you next week.